You're streaming.
This 36? Oh.
Let's call this meeting to order, the Oconee County Planning Commission, the Thursday, January the 19th at 5 o'clock. Our first order of business is invocation. Mr. Ruth, if you would, please.
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you'd like to. Well, dearest Father, thank you for this day that you have given us to enjoy, to do work, hopefully to do good work for your purposes, for kingdom building here, but not our kingdom, but what is your will, so that we might do benefit to our neighbor, to our families, to the county at large, and to the state. Your word says, without a vision, the people perish, so help the Planning Commission this evening and through all the work they do to have a vision that's guided by wisdom and insight, more than they would have on their own, but collectively and with your help. And I pray that this meeting would be your meeting. In your name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Johnson?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, hope everyone had a chance to read the minutes from our January 5th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Is there any corrections need to be made? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We have no one signed up for public comment for non-agenda items. Is there any commission member comments?
Oh, I got something. Sorry. 2 checkpoints for the comp plan. Lions Club picked up litter along Highway 130. This satisfies 6.2.4.4, working to promote and discourage littering of all ages. And then this other one I saw in the journal, this article, Seneca Faith Cabin Project. This is significant for its role in African American education and social history in South Carolina. What they're renovating and rehabbing was constructed in 1937 and is one of only 2 remaining freestanding faith cabin libraries in the state, and the only remaining building from the Seneca Junior College campus. So that was in the paper, and that satisfies 5.3.2.4. Got it. Yep.
Anyone else?
I got a few. Y'all know how passionate I am about preserving land and agriculture in the county. And I've been pretty much all over the state this past 6-8 weeks doing some personal stuff and some agricultural stuff. And I've been through a lot of counties that I know have development standards or density provisions, building codes. And I have yet to see anything different than what's happening here. I've been places in Richland County and Lexington County that it is new houses as far as the eye can see. And I know they have standards or have development standards, density standards. So where I'm going with this is I'm not sure where we're headed to do anything different than what's already on most people's books. So what I want you to think about is how do we promote growth, control growth, and it be smart growth without sacrificing the beauty of our county and our infrastructure. I really think that our infrastructure is really stretched, and it's only probably going to get worse before it gets better. So as we're thinking in this year, I hope that we can have a vision and a plan to do something a little different than what other people do. Let's stand out. Let's be a focal point for other counties or other communities to look and say, man, look what Oconee done to promote growth and to control it. So with that being said, I believe we probably going to have to start from ground zero again on our density and subdivision standards or building standards, whatever we want to call it. Just merely for the fact I again, as I repeat, I've been through counties that have them, and I don't see where they work. And so just keep that on your mind, and as we go through this year, and I just hope we have a really productive year this year.
Thanks, sir.
Well, now that you said that, I do have something to say. Controlled growth, the high density especially, definitely gonna follow where the sewer is. If we can control where the sewer's gonna go, it's not in our power to do that, but we can also say where we want growth and where we don't want growth. And they just came out with a study for the lower south section of the county. And so, we got a lot of information. We might want to do a work session on that. And as I said last week, it'd really be good to have Chris Eliezer come in and talk to us. We could get a lot of information from a presentation from him.
Anyone else? If not, staff comments?
Nothing for tonight.
Okay, we will go right into number 8. Discussion regarding South Carolina Freedom of Information Act with county attorney. I will turn it over to you, Mr. Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe at least probably you two have heard this spiel before, but it's been a while, so it's probably a good time to go over it again. There are 2 primary issues within the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act that y'all need to keep in mind as you do your daily business and business here. One is what constitutes a meeting. Meeting is really broadly defined within the, I'll just call it FOIA from now on, the Freedom of Information Act. It's really any time that you have a quorum of a body together, your body, you have a quorum together, so it's 4 of y'all, that comes together and discusses or acts on any matter that's within essentially the bailiwick that you have, within something that you would supervise, speak to, address for the planning commissions, that's very broad. So if you have 4 of you together, whether it's a chance meeting, and I'll talk about some other ways that meetings can happen, or you just intentionally get together, it constitutes a meeting if you're going to act or discuss something that comes within, the planning commission's, I guess, powers, responsibilities, what have you, very broadly defined. So I'm giving you that kind of warning because that happens really easily. Mr. Pearson was great. Tuesday night he came up and said, and I didn't see that there was a quorum at the county council meeting. Apparently there was, and he says, are we okay here without having this meeting noticed, properly noticed, with an agenda, et cetera, because we have a quorum there and because we're sitting apart? I said, yes. And that's the same thing I'll ask county council to do if they're gonna come to some, assembly that they might discuss county business, is to sit apart from one another so they're not, within earshot, so they can discuss it. Because that's an unlawful meeting, even if it's by chance that y'all are together and you discuss a matter of planning commission business. So just keep that in mind. Frankie, you did great in bringing it to my attention and making sure everybody is separated, but it can happen very easily. All of you all are invested in what's going on with the county, and so you may show up to the same events. I would just, as best you can, stay separate. This doesn't apply to social gatherings and things of that nature. If you're together for a social gathering, a good example is like the Association of Counties has meetings twice a year, and all of the county officials get together. Obviously, they don't notice that, schedule it, and put an agenda out as a public meeting because it's a social meeting. Now, if you were to go off and talk about county business, you're towing that line, a dangerous line. So anytime that you're going to come together and discuss county business as a quorum, to be noticed properly, which at bare minimum, unless it's an emergency, is 24 hours notice. Otherwise, it's noticed much further in advance than that. And you're going to have an agenda that lists out everything, and you're going to stick to that agenda. I think all of y'all are good, from what I've seen, about sticking to the agenda, but that's a third issue, I guess. To know that what's on the agenda needs to be the left and right margins of what y'all talk about. You can't just pop up with another topic and start discussing that without making a motion to amend the agenda. And if it's something that you're going to take action on that evening, you cannot amend the agenda during the meeting unless there's some emergency or exigent circumstance. So You want to have that agenda pinned down in advance and stick to what's on the agenda for meetings. Yeah, Mr. Gahn.
Commissioner comments, that would be an okay place for saying anything that's on our minds.
It's a good time to talk about anything that's on your minds, but to turn it into something that you might take action on or say, yeah, let's do that. And like, we're talking about FOIA here, it's on the agenda. But if you were to bring that up during, council member comments and want to start discussing it as a group, then that would not be appropriate. What you could do, and it's often the case, is bring it up as council member comments. It's not on the agenda and say, hey, something's on my mind during this meeting, can we have this on the next agenda? That's a good way to do that.
Can I go just a little bit further with a question related to commissioner comments? Okay, let's say we have agenda number 4, and it's about bridges. And instead of grandstanding during the time when bridges come up, I'm thinking it would be more appropriate for me to make comments during time for me to make comments that aren't directly related to the business at hand with a possible motion or something like that. And so, therefore, what I'm asking is, which place would be more appropriate for my personal comments on something that might be related to a motion, but, I know it's coming up because it's on the agenda. You understand my question?
I think I do. And if it is something that's on the agenda, definitely the best time to talk about it is during that portion of the meeting. So I would limit your council member comments to non-agenda items as best you can, and save, those comments that are gonna be as to agenda items, even if they're tangentially related and might be remote. I would save those during that time. It's all a matter of giving the public notice. People may show up, they know that we do administrative stuff for the first 15, 20, 30 minutes or what have you. They may show up 40 minutes in, the agenda item that they're interested in may be something, well, they're not gonna get to that till 7:30, so I'm gonna show up then, just as an example. So you've already said your Ps made their comments and they've missed it. So just think about that. We're operating in a glass house, so to speak, with county government, so you want to have the public the opportunity to participate, which, is usually, it's limited to a certain extent, but at least hear everything that's going on, everything that y'all say and discuss, and have the opportunity when the appropriate time is to make public comments. So what I wanted to, which is probably a little bit more of a tricky issue, and I have not seen that y'all danced up to this line and caused me any concern, but it's worth mentioning, is there are ways to have a meeting that are not like this. So if James sends out an email to you all, here's the agenda for this week, and someone hits a reply all, this is an interesting topic, I would like us to discuss, this about this agenda item. That's a meeting. It's not been noticed, there's no agenda for that electronic meeting that y'all just had, so it's unlawful. Something to be mindful of. I have probably too long of a little disclaimer or, caveat that I put in all my emails to county council just to warn them and remind them every time. I'll move it around in different places so it's new and vivid, just to not hit reply all. Be aware that meetings can happen electronically via email. Obviously, phone conversations, if you have a quorum on a teleconference, that's a meeting if you're talking about county business. So meetings can happen as drafted in FOIA very broadly so that the public is not excluded. Obviously, there are a lot of times back in the day where business is done and the public wasn't, a part of it. And, thank goodness it's changed now. Sunshine laws have come in to cast the light in on what public bodies do, and that's a good thing, so we want to follow that line.
Can we
Yes, sir.
still call in on meetings? I know
Yes.
during COVID.
Yes,
Now we're over COVID, it's still okay and legal to represent our districts or at large by a phone call. Let's say I'm down at Seabrook or vacationing somewhere, but I want to be attentive to the agenda. So I can just call in and it's still okay, right?
it is. The couple of rules for that, the public needs to be able to hear you, and you need to be able to, say you, since you're the example, you need to be able to hear what everybody else is saying. So those are just practical matters. And then the real functional matter is you still need to have a quorum present live where the meeting is happening. So If you had 3 people remote, 4 people here, you're good, provided everyone could hear what's going on, and you could fully participate that way. Other questions? Does that make sense about meetings? All right, the other item, which is tricky, and it's more of a warning, I guess, than anything, is not only do we live in glass houses and to the extent that our actions need to be seen, what we say and do needs to be seen, the public have an opportunity to know it's going to happen and can participate, but everything that we write, everything that we produce that deals with county business is a public record. So public records are subject to being produced under the Freedom of Information Act upon request. Public records is very broadly defined as well. So essentially, if you can keep in your mind, does this email, does this text message, this is where I have usually had to have a wrestling match with county employees or whatever before, does this text message touch on county business? Because if it does, we get a FOIA about it, we're gonna have to ask for, and we usually just ask for screenshots if you have text messages about it, and folks are more, they're savvy with their FOIA requests. I wanna see every text message that the planning commission has had on this particular topic. And you're like, no way, I may have, texted, someone else on the planning commission about this topic, but I was also talking to them about going to have dinner, I was talking to them about whatever else, and it's on my personal phone. That portion of the message is still a public record, so we would still ask a screenshot of it. If you didn't give it, we get sued about it, it's gonna come out during discovery, and that's when it really unravels and falls apart. The reason I highlight text messages is because, and try to get county personnel not to do that. Sometimes, it's easiest, and I'll do it too. It's like, hey, you're gonna be here, let's meet there. It's just easier than emails. But emails, they're still informal. They've become more informal and quick to do. But they're still more formal than text messages, and we just tend to be a little bit more cavalier in our text messages and run different topics together and stuff that you may not want to have broadcast in the Journal or the Greenville newspaper or anything like that. So bear in mind that those text messages can become public records, and we can't come searching for them, if we get a FOIA request on that topic. So that's something to be really aware of, and I can't give a big enough warning for that because I've had to make that request before with county employees. It's a little bit different. They have county phones, and we're like, we've got a FOIA request on this topic, we got to get your phone. People obviously freak out. There's more stuff on here than is in my house about my personal information, right? And everybody has that. So phones are just a window into things that folks want to keep private. Obviously identity protection, things like that. We don't give y'all phones, and we don't give you email addresses that are separate either. But email addresses are pretty easy to create, different accounts. It's not a bad idea to have one that would be separate for county business. I'm not saying you have to do that, but because you can get emails on your personal devices with your personal email address and it constitutes a public record, you may not be keen on the county having to dig around for that, Because you're here, like I said, you're operating in a glass house, but you still want to have your privacy. But when a FOIA request comes in, we may not know what's a public record until we do a deep dive search for it. Does that make sense?
So question, so when we walk in this room, there's a sign on the door, no cell phones during council meetings, or whatever the sign on the door says. There's no cell phones
I've never
right into council.
I used to walk in that door all the time. I have not noticed that. What is
So
that?
I guess I'm wondering, that's what it says. I just saw it, I go, that's interesting, no
It
cell
says
phones
no
during
cell phones in meetings, period?
council meetings, I think can I read it real quick?
Yeah, please.
Mr. Root, there's also been a question about commissioners using phones while we're up here doing business. Hope you'll address that as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a new question. For the planning commission, it may be a new question. It's one that dealt with before.
No cell phones or pagers allowed during council meetings. So is that a policy that we as a commission would have to? No cell phones during our commission meetings? Do we assume that that's a policy here?
Well, I hate to, fall on my own sword, but I didn't know that was on the door, and we don't have an ordinance about it, and it's not in any kind of procedural guidelines, so without something like that establishing why that sign says that, it's a matter of decorum, because it is better. It's just, if I go in a courtroom, and this has happened before, not to me, and my phone goes off, the judge is fully within his rights to have me carted off and arrested. This courtroom is different, but for the same purposes of decorum and keeping the normal flow of the operations, they ensure that all cell phones are turned off, and for folks who aren't a member of the bar, you can't even bring your phone in. So, yes, that can be a policy. I'm not, and it's a balancing of interest. I'm not too keen on saying, hey, don't bring any cell phones past that door as a matter of law for the county, because there's always things that arise. And you may, do research on a topic while you're up there. There could be any number of reasons to have the device, like I said, and I don't like it. I guess I'm old enough not to like, and I've had, 5 teenagers at one time, so I've lived through it. I don't like the devices because they're so ubiquitous and they take such a big part of our lives. But they're here, and we do a lot of things on them. And yes, it may be bad form to pull out your phone during a meeting to do something, but sometimes that's necessary. So if y'all were to make, I guess to the essence of your question, can we make a policy for the planning commission that does something to curtail or limit or do, dial in, no pun intended, the use of phones? Yeah, y'all could do that. It would just have to be, carefully done again, because phones are essential to a lot of things that we do now, and they're, private devices, except for when they contain a county record.
So if somebody is in a habit of researching on their phone during a meeting, well, do they then, I guess in terms of transparency and glass house theory, do they say, I'm just gonna let you all know I'm looking this up on my phone and this is what my phone is, and they have to disclose what they're doing?
Not have to disclose. There's no rule about that. So a lot of times FOIA is triggered when the request is made. So in your example, Tom's out there and he had talked about an issue that's dear to his heart, and which are a lot of them. And had to take a shot, just one. And while he's made his presentation, and y'all are talking about the issue, and he sees Mr. Johnson working on his phone or something like this, and he sends in a FOIA request. I would like to see during this meeting all text messages and all phone activity, whatever, related to county business that occurred during the planning commission of today's the 19th of January 19th, 2023. So that would usually trigger it. It's not something, so it's reactive in that sense. We don't gather all the public records that are on your phones, on any kind of consistent basis, so we're storekeepers of them. We do that with county devices, obviously county computers, all the records. We have retention policies and things like that. With board and commission members, it's just a little bit different. And I don't know if I veered away from your question, Ms. Spicer, necessarily or not, but if you all wanted to put something in place, a rule or rule of procedure in place that said, all right, hey, none of us want to be rude to another person. If we pull out a phone, we're going to essentially say, this is what we're doing with our phone. I suppose you could do that, but I think that's fraught with some peril on how it may play out. Because, only time I've ever seen that happen is when a council or commission member or something is at odds with somebody else. And they see that person using their phone. It's like, what are you doing on your phone right now? Why don't you tell everybody if it's that important? So that's usually when it pops up. In my experience, that's when I've seen it. And it's an adversarial situation. And they're just, you've got privacy issues, constitutional privacy issues that come to bear in this that, making some mandatory disclosure part of the rules of procedure would cause me heartburn.
So there's no no guidelines to it.
I'm sorry?
We don't have a policy, you can't establish a policy.
No, like I said, you could. They're just parameters of which, like I said, if you touch on privacy issues, search and seizure issues, if you mandate the turning over of phones or information on phones every time you look at your phone, something like that, those are things that the constitutional safeguards are in place to, and I don't want to overblow this, but it is a constitutional issue, so, that's
Tough one,
where
I
it comes
mean,
from.
I get it, because texting is a hidden activity, and if we're supposed to be, everything we do is public record, then, I don't know, I think it's a toughie. I mean, does that mean every note I take here is public record, or the information I bring in to talk about something is public record?
It could be, yes,
Yeah.
indeed. So, I guess, if you're wanting to police this, say, whoever's wanting to, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Nix.
So some of us have emergency response duty and are compelled to possess their cell phones at all times.
Yeah.
Or pagers.
Yeah, there's a myriad of issues that could come out that would be problematic with it. There are ways you could craft a policy to get around that, but I think in the end, it's a matter of, like so many things, and I guess we lose it in this day and age and in this time of, kind of a golden rule, reap what you sow. I'm not gonna get on my phone unless I have to. It's an emergency, or I have to do some research or something like that. Because it could be, Mr. Markovich could send a FOIA in for, whatever records were created on the phone during that time. Anybody could. Y'all could. Actually, when you're not as a body, you're individuals, and you can FOIA documents just like anybody else. So, and I'm not trying to give you, hey, this is a way to get back at my fellow commission members, because that's the last thing we need is more at odds ness or adversarial tones with everybody, but that could happen. So I think it's more of a, be mindful.
If we wanted to do that, how would we do it? Would it be a resolution? How would we agree how we're gonna limit our phones? And, what tool do we have to do
Yeah,
that?
the planning commission has the ability to create bylaws for itself that is akin to the BZA. If you wanted to, so those bylaws are policy matters that can be created on a single vote and recreated and revised on a single vote. If you wanted to make something more sturdy, you'd do it by an ordinance and propose something that would be added into the planning commission section in chapter 32.
Well, I know we can police ourselves, but the one thing that bothers me with cell phone use the most is the possibility of a commissioner or a councilman or council person to be attentive to their phone so that they can get coached by someone who may be out there or may be out greater in the community or something. That has, a feeling like, hey, I wish you'd vote yes on this, or whatever it is, In other words, trying to bias someone during the act of our meeting.
Trying to buy them?
Bias.
Bias,
them
okay, sorry.
Towards a particular way of voting, or maybe even something to say that they haven't thought of on their own. So you see, that's the thing I'm saying that would bother me the most, is that someone's almost acting, like, hey, I wouldn't have probably said that, but now that I see George, my friend George, just hypothetically, sent me this and said, oh, you ought to say such and such,
Yeah. So I think there's two thoughts that come up with that. One is the policing aspect. If somebody thinks that's going on, they can always send in a FOIA and find out. So that's the first part. And I know it's retroactive, it's reactive, but it's probably the cleanest way to do it. I don't know of, and I'm glad to look to see if there's been some body that's effectively done something to capture that at the moment, aside from something that invades those constitutional protections that I'm concerned about. So that's the first part, yes, it can be policed by FOIA from Tom or whomever about that. But then the second part, when you think about it, unless you're living in a bubble, I mean, we're all being influenced about these matters, and and I doubt any of you have been immune from someone saying, oh, that's it's great that you're serving on the planning commission. What do you think about this? Wouldn't you like to isn't this a better way to look at that? So the fact that
During the
they,
meeting, we're talking about the.
I understand, but is that necessarily all that consequential if it's before the meeting or during the meeting?
I think so. During the meeting, they should be attentive to what's going on and what the people are saying. If they're attentive to, oh, my friend George just sent me something, and I never thought about that, that'd be a really good thing to say. You know, I just don't agree with that kind of thing. And I think we can self-police, you know, or if you want to call it that, but, you know, just like the game of golf, you know, your score is what you say your score is. You know, and I think we can score ourselves, but I just, you know, I was just sharing, that is probably the worst use of your phone, in my opinion.
Yeah, and well, I think, and I didn't mean to diminish what you're saying by saying is it consequential, the timing of it, because I do get what you're saying. In one respect in particular, it can lower the public confidence in what's happening. You know, you may traipse in here with an issue on the table and have your mind fully made up because what you've talked to John Doe about beforehand. You may not have developed your own opinion at all, but you're going to come in and recite that. So it's not different if they text you during the time or not. But if the public sees you up there and thinks, well, they're just, you know, regurgitating what somebody else has said to them, then that's, you know, that lowers the public confidence in what their appointed or elected official is doing. So I
If
understand
someone
what
was
you're
here
saying.
in person, they wouldn't, we wouldn't allow them to make those comments.
Right. No, I do understand, yeah. Sir.
So, 3 different scenarios. Tom sitting in the audience, I text on my phone within FOIA to request it.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
So,
I can't
Tom
see
sitting
very
in the
well, but
audience.
I usually can hear good, I'm sorry.
I text on my phone, that's within FOIA,
If you're
in the meeting.
Not every text, no. If it has to be about county business. So,
Okay, all right,
yeah.
and it's
And-
county business, okay.
right.
I text county business out of a meeting to another county planning commissioner. That's within FOIA.
Even if it's not to another county planning commission, it could be.
So if I
within FOIA.
text about county business to anyone as a private citizen, it's still within FOIA because I'm on the planning commission.
Yes.
Now, that's interesting.
It's something, and it's, you know, the boundaries of that, you know, that's a very broad rule, but the FOIA is written very broad, have a big net to catch that. The exact contours of it have never been tested because folks, you know, one, the law always lags behind technology, and even though people have been using cell phones and texting for 20 years or 25 years or more, the law hasn't really kept up with it that much. So nobody hasn't, you know, we haven't had a slew of FOIAs for, I want, every time you've talked about county business on your phone and created a public record, I want a copy of that. One, what purpose would it ultimately serve? Two, in light of what purpose would it ultimately serve, the requester is going to have to pay for it. You know, they're going to have to pay for the time involved in searching it. They got to pay the time involved in producing copies, all of that. So that's why it probably hasn't come to bear all that much, but I may have printed out, I didn't, but I can pull up the definition of a public record real quick just so you see the breadth of it.
And he's using the computer right now to find that information out.
Man. Now, for good or bad, most of what I do is not a public record. It's easy for me to say, hey, you know, you all should be worried about this. Plenty of it is, but most of it is protected.
And I represent myself, so.
Tom was also I was about to say jailhouse attorney, but it's something akin to that.
I haven't seen here where we have done something like that I would have ever felt like any of us ever abused that scenario. But I do think it's worth us knowing so that if all of a sudden we do feel like somebody's doing something wrong, that after a meeting going, hey, that looked weird, so that we could all be aware of it in the future.
I've had, you know, the issue has come up a couple times with county council since I've been up here. And in my prior life, a little bit, it wasn't so I've been up here 7 years, and so just doing, there's a few times in the low country that came up, but even then, people didn't seem to be texting as much as they do now. But it came up, but usually in a situation where somebody is at odds with somebody else and is looking for an opportunity to gig them. But you gotta be aware of that, you know? I'm one of those people that people are looking for an opportunity to gig for whatever reason or another, you know? I've given an opinion that they didn't like, and so I've gotten their crosshairs, and I just operate, putting aside the attorney-client and work product protections that I have. If I'm talking about county business, am I willing for it to be on the newspaper? I mean, everybody's heard that. You're willing to say something that's gonna be on the front page. If not, you know, maybe you don't wanna say it.
Pat, did you have to leave early?
6:20.
6:20.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry.
Six.
Look, public record, I'll just do this real quickly. Public record includes all forms of media. I'm just, you know, summarizing that. Prepared, owned, used, or in possession, or retained by a public body. So, used, prepared, it's a gigantically broad definition. And then it exempts from there certain things, but all of the parameters of what is and what is not a public record really comes down to either case law, decisional law, or an attorney general's opinion, usually. But you're talking about county business, you're a public official, think about that being a public record.
It says
That's a
body,
good way to
not.
keep yourself safe, I think, is the best way to
It
think about
does
it.
say body, though. What's considered a body? Not a quorum, obviously, but one person is considered a
So
body?
it's the county, so they're not considering you as, or you, like as a public body, but the county is a public body, and y'all are a finger, or an arm, or a leg, or whatever, we're all members of that body. So it's all one, so to speak. So that's, you know, like I said, it's a broad definition, and it's something to be, you know, my purpose was to bring that to your attention, not, you know, to instill fear or anything like that. And if y'all want to craft a policy, certainly, you know, we can talk about that and dial that in. But it's really just something to be aware of. I think a lot of folks are not.
Thank you.
Good? All right. Other questions about that? Because I did have, I know, a lot to talk about, potentially with the junkyard ordinance. That's all I had for my show there.
Okay, if there's not any more questions, let's go ahead and move right on into number 9. Still no one has signed up to speak. Did you have anything? No. Okay. So let's go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Root again to let us know what's what and when's where.
All right, so my first question is, I know this has been something y'all have been working on and churning on for a long time, and it has come to me for review. Are y'all prepared to make a motion to direct me to put this in final form and resubmit to you to then send to county council? Is that political will there now? So go ahead, it's probably a good time to go ahead and make that motion and get a second, and then we can discuss the ordinance, potential ordinance after that.
I'm not.
So the motion would be, motion to have the county attorney to put the proposed ordinance, the one up there, last version, I'm sure, hopefully I got the last version, in final form and resubmit it to the planning commission, ordinance ready, we'll say. Obviously then to turn it to the council if y'all agree upon it at that time.
So moved.
Second.
Right, so then we'll discuss it at that point. Let me start out with a big question. It's the same question I've posed to y'all a couple times that I've been here in the last year. What are you trying to accomplish and why? And I promise you, I've spent many hours going over this document, But that is the fundamental, initial question. And this is discussion, so we don't want to talk over one another, but this ordinance, why are you putting it together? What are you trying to accomplish? Because I need this for legislative history. This is, if it gets challenged,
For the
this gives.
safety of the people and the citizens of this county is one of the reasons that I felt that we needed this.
Looking at the findings, items 1 through 6 to prevent those or mitigate those, but not item 7 in my opinion.
To regulate a legitimate business,
Do I take this as that your reasoning, or is that?
well, we got businesses out
Council's
there
story?
they have no business license, we don't know what they're doing, it's just the recognition of and it is a legitimate business, a need, and it just needs to be more informative to the public record and to the county of what's happening, what's going on, what's here. In emergency services, do we have dangerous chemicals, are they properly marked? Do we have oil on site, do we have tires that need to be disposed of,
Understand.
So it's a legitimate business that needs to be following the parameters of that industry.
Yes, sir.
I would agree in items 1 through 6 as well. My thoughts in discussing or listening to people talk about it is that our county is growing very quickly in all different directions by all types of businesses, but especially within the residential realm. And as you have more people moving in, you have the heavier density, you also have the need for disposing of or discarding of, or again, any other business that might be created by more people coming in, and junkyards could be that. But as they come in and as that growth continues, we're eventually gonna be bumping up against each other, whether that's commercial against residential or whether that's a junkyard against residential. And I think now's the time to come in and put something in place that deals with those 1 through 6, from whether it be safety or otherwise.
Thank you.
So when you look at, trying to get input from the citizens of our county, junkyards has been one of the things that's come forward. And I think that we're, with that, we're responsible for at least looking at it. And I think that's one of the things that, since we don't have a lot of power as planning commissioners, anything that we think the public is interested in, we should, try to format it and put it in writing, send it up to the council, let them discuss it, decide what. If we don't do that, then we're really being negligent in the job. If we know that the citizens of our county are interested in something, and then we don't address it.
That's good. Couldn't have asked for more. That's helpful, because this is the kind of thing that could get challenged in litigation, and of course, generally going to look to the contours, the boundaries of the document first. But if there's any ambiguities, if there's any question of intent, it always comes up. This video is going to be watched. It's going to be an exhibit, and to see that those legitimate purposes are on your mind is helpful.
I've got a discussion question.
Yes, sir.
So, and it kind of spins off Pat's discussion. Are we discriminating against junkyards as a business as compared to other businesses in the county proper? By requiring what we're requiring in this ordinance, draft ordinance.
Right. And I don't think you have that equal protection concern with this on in the face of the document as I see it, because the class of entities that do this kind of business, it's a different kind of business that brings different kind of hazards. And whether or not you agree with the aesthetic issue with number 7 or not, the 1 through 6, as well as the responses that you gave me, are legitimate, and they're more catered towards this operation, as opposed to I don't want to say things that are less, be delicate with the way to put it, but that carry less of a risk of hazards to neighbors, and to the public at large. So these operations can. So that sets them in a different kind of class. So I don't have, depending on what you ultimately come up with, I don't have an equal protection concern with it. If you're going to parse out different types of junkyards, and be easy on a particular type and, more strenuous on the other type, then that causes a concern. If you're gonna be, harder on a particular type in one section of a county and different in another section of a county without a reason to do so, that causes concerns. But as a general rule, no, I don't have that concern off the bat.
Could we add, or include in this without any major problems, the salvage or recycling businesses that we have, or will have, or could have, or anything? Could that be added into this ordinance as it sits now?
Well, the way it says it does, in my mind, it kind of does include them. If you're looking to regulate, say, scrap metal operations, there's more than a few state statutes that touch on scrap metal recycling, and just use that as an example. There are still areas, although state regulations touch on it, there's still areas that local government can speak to it, but there is that preemption issue. So it would just depend. So when I say preemption, kind of flows down. If the state has said, no, hey, unequivocally stated, this is our area of legislation, local government can't, dilly-dally, do anything different with it, speed limits, firearms, things like that. State's very big about, it has to have statewide uniformity, so we're preempting, meaning local governments, you can't speak to it. Federal does the same thing as the states, and obviously we have plenty of contention about that, and states' rights and all of that, and that's good fun for me. But in the real world, as it plays out, it's not, always the best. But to answer your question, yes, but it depends. Which is
Well, I was talking more,
typical
Why
lawyer
was it,
answer.
why would it not apply to scrap yards?
well, we don't have anything in here that says it does or it doesn't.
I think you do have, in the
It
definition,
says sell for resale,
and you
and it
include,
also talks about scrap metal.
Where are you looking, David? Where are you?
Definition 3.
Definition, the definition for commercial junk says items for resale.
Oh, gotcha.
And then junkyard includes, land used in whole or in part for commercial storage and or sale of waste paper, rags, scrap metal, parts, et cetera.
Okay.
so you're speaking of further regulation.
Well, no, I was just wanting to make sure that they were included in this, due to complaints I've had, or people in my district have complained about different things, and I didn't know that this would apply to, a scrapyard. They were looking at, the screening or portion of it.
Yeah, there are a lot of other jurisdictions that will deal with scrapyards independently or just let that be a matter of state. Let the state take care of it and DHEC take care of it. But if you look, I was going to address it in my rewrite. I have a number of questions. I know we're short on time already, but you are addressing it to a certain extent. I mean, there's a lot in here, but it's not altogether too robust in what it's doing apart from, the screening and a little bit about location.
You said you had additional specific questions. I had some questions regarding definition and information that would be attorney-style questions, maybe directed to you, but also to the group. Would it be appropriate for you to go through your questions first?
Yeah, if we could, because I'm sure this is gonna take us up, at the latest, we needed to cut off around 6:10 or 6:10.
Pat needs.
No, don't do it on my account.
He needs to go by 6:20.
2025, yeah.
But
I do want to cover some of this because it's a direct question for the attorney.
So when we get up to that time, if I haven't touched on it, jump in and say, hey, this is the question. So I'm just gonna go down in the way that I marked it up, and it just flows down, so. James, I mean, everybody's got it on their screen or in front of them. I don't know if you're able to,
This is page one.
yeah, I don't know if you're able to use the whole screen.
Oh.
Love it, so there you go. All right, so the purposes, we've talked about, I think there's some, just tiny, there's gonna be some grammatical red lines on my part, because I know this is a working document. That's not meant to pick on anybody, it's just a unique way of writing that attorneys do.
Yeah.
So, but the first question I had, let me get to my comments. And I think you know what you're talking about here, but in purpose, you reference development standards ordinance. Are you talking about the unified performance standards? Are you talking about what? You know, we don't have really something called that necessarily, development standards ordinance, but I'm assuming y'all are talking about chapter 32.
Yes.
Where it would most appropriately fit, yes.
Here's where the cell phone comes in.
So chapter 32 is called Unified Performance Standards, and then within that section that it could fall within, but it may be a different subset of it, of course, is the land development and subdivision regulations. That's the title for that. But this has been countenanced in, and you initially proposed it flowing from the zoning provision of the state code. Those are matters that I can plug in, but I wanted to make sure that as I do this rewrite, that I'm not giving David Root's version of the junkyard.
I don't think we've discussed where it should go, other than leaning on staff and yourself to say this is where it should go.
So, but when you say development standards ordinance, you're thinking chapter 32 or 38 appropriately placed? Is that the essence of
Chapter
what?
32, Article 10,
Says,
Yeah, what is
that
it?
would be the new article,
be any art.
commercial junkyards.
Next item, right after that, it says such uses may only be established and operated in the county if they do not constitute a hazard to health and welfare of the people. So that, in my mind, though it is somewhat of a subjective requirement, you're adding an additional requirement that's not delineated necessarily below. So
So what do you?
I'm gonna look at this, somebody who, member of the public or a litigator afterwards, what do you mean? What is this standard? Is this a standard in addition to what you're trying to say by the fencing and by the setbacks? Or is this something completely separate that you're trying to ensure, that, all right, you may not, junkyard operator, you may not have violated our screening setback requirements, but we don't see this, we see this as a hazardous operation, so you're violating section 2A. Are y'all thinking of it in that way?
I may be speaking out of turn, but I don't know that we were trying to create an if-then as much as we were trying to say, this is the reason that we're trying to establish this ordinance. So not as if it can only be established if, I think we were really trying to say that we are looking for the health and welfare of the people, and not creating something that's attracting vermin. Or that things like this could attract vermin.
It goes back to items 3 through 6 and or actually 3 through 7 and mitigation of those.
Yeah, so,
It's really a repeat of those.
right,
Findings.
it might fit better up there. But, okay, I understand, it's not a standalone, as you say, it's subjective-ish standard, but it's something, again, that's the intent. Right,
It's a
okay,
summary of the purpose.
gotcha.
Remember, this came from the Pickens County ordinance, we just didn't strike it out.
Okay. Not gonna pick on Deer
I
Pickens
believe that's
County.
right.
Kind of why it's being.
Toss them under the bus.
They're a good one to pick on.
All right, flowing down, there'll be some other just red line changes if y'all vote after we do this for me to finalize it. But commercial junk shall mean items for resale and more than 5 junked vehicles. What do you mean by junked vehicles? Is this
This was one of
akin to
the
what's
areas
below,
that-
is dismantled, wrecked, or just?
Isn't a standard inoperable for X number of ton, no tags? Isn't that kind of standard or no?
There is, within the International Property Maintenance Code, there's, pretty specific definition of unregistered inoperable vehicles, but all I have here is junked. So I'm not trying, again, this is not picking on anybody or picking on y'all or Pickens County from whom it came or Greenville County. It looks like some of this came from Greenville, but it's to make sure, again, that I'm not writing my ordinance, but I'm reflecting the intent of the planning commission.
To me,
This was
the
one of the
definition
areas
of,
that I had concerns under definitions, is commercial junk shall mean items for resale. To me, that's a garage sale potentially. And then the more than 5 junked vehicles, one, we have to define what junked is, and 2, this touches closely on personal property as opposed to commercial junkyards. And so I was gonna see if it's something we shouldn't be striking out of there, something called commercial junk. We've defined junk, and we've defined junkyard. Why are we separately defining commercial junk versus other junk?
I got a comment about that, because we were trying to regulate a business. So a commercial junkyard in the county should have a retail license and be a legitimate business. That would constitute a commercial junkyard. And what would put them in that category is if they have more than 5 junked vehicles.
But
If they have 3, they don't have a junkyard, they just
But my point is that we have something called commercial junk over here, and we have something called other junk over here. Does commercial junk also not apply to the other junk? In other words, should it all be commercial junk rather than the word junk as separately defined?
I think that's a good point, because you just need a good, succinct, but robust enough definition of junk, and then a good definition of commercial. So you're not catching a transient activity like a yard sale or something of that
well,
nature.
I think I understand now why Frankie's concerned about scrapyard. A scrapyard could have plenty of items for resale, but not more than 5 junk vehicles stored.
Well, that's just commercial junk. I agree with your suggestion to strike.
Well, I mean, to me, it's treading real close on private property rights, because if people have 6 cars, old cars sitting on their property, this stage you can't have more than 5, and I know the main code, the international code, whatever, says you're not supposed to have but 1.
As long as they're not for resale,
But-
it's okay.
But still, that,
Which it doesn't really say that here. It says or more items for resale or 5 junk cars.
Well,
It says and.
Oh, and, I'm sorry.
We changed it to and.
I got you.
How about if I come back, because I don't want to get anything, I know, like I said, preface all this, I know that you've been working through this a long way, so I'm not trying to, stick any wrenches in. But what if I come back with, I think, a definition of junk, and then a definition of commercial that makes it real clear who it's going to apply to, who's junk.
Yeah, I just think it's odd that we have 2 kinds of junk and not necessarily what's applicable. While I'm saying that, if I may be so as to describe, all section 4 talks about commercial junkyard, commercial junkyard, commercial junkyard. But we don't have a definition for commercial junkyard. We have a definition for junkyard, but we don't have a definition for commercial junkyard. And interestingly, when you get down to section 5B, it does say junkyard there for the first time under section 5B. And it's actually separate and apart from commercial junk. It's saying this kind of junk over here, this junkyard over here can't be expanded without it now falling under the regulations of this kind of junk, which this kind of junk we call commercial junk, and this kind of junkyard we call just junkyard. I really think under definitions, instead of it saying junkyard, it should say, since we've highlighted all these with capital letters, that we should have a definition of commercial junkyard and junkyard, maybe used interchangeably, or just use the word commercial junkyard since we're talking about commercial. But I think to have everything related in capital letters, commercial junkyard, and no definition for commercial junkyard, I think we'd create a problem.
But the purpose is, the planning commission is unified. If this does pass, you only want it to apply to a commercial enterprise,
Correct.
as
yeah.
that generally is understood. And not something that
Yard
is,
sales,
I'm sorry.
not yard sales.
Right, not something that is a temporary, and
Not
that's
someone's
spoken
junkie
to
yard.
in there. Right. And so that's the way I'm going to approach it.
Thank you for letting me jump in with those.
Oh, anytime. I mean, this is really just a give and take to make sure I'm headed in the right direction. And just, because I'm going to rewrite it this way unless y'all tell me differently, a junkyard means any area used in whole and part for commercial storage and or sale of waste, and then you recite with a little bit of tweak the definition of junk. My notion is to define commercial, define junk, define junkyard or commercial junkyard as the place where the junk is in a store, as opposed to regurgitating the definition and like here where it's kind of different when you get into incorporating, what the junkyard has. So,
One other item, if you would pay close attention to from a legal standpoint, is we've got between the two lakes, 700 miles of shoreline and lots of watercraft that are being abandoned and things like that. I was looking up the definition of vehicle, and in several legal cases, vehicles did not include watercraft for some reason. Vehicle was something that was only landworthy, so I want to make sure that watercraft is something that when we are talking about junkyards, that it's clearly understood that if you've created a junkyard of boats like there is out on Highway 85, that would fall under these level of ordinances.
It is mentioned under
No
junkyard.
watercraft.
Yeah.
It is, but when we talked about commercial junk, it said junked vehicles. And as he's rewriting this information, vehicle, I found in several legal cases, didn't apply to watercraft.
and now we don't need any kind of unanimity or a majority on stuff that I'm gonna put in, because if you have particular things like, I would like to have that in there, this is a good idea, unless after we discuss it further and we say, no, let's not do that, I'll put it in there, because you're not gonna vote on it tonight. When I bring it back, there's a watercraft in there, and I didn't hit your intent, or not everybody's with you, that'll be the time for y'all to strike it before it goes to council. So yes, I will.
I just want to make sure that it was thought through as these definitions were being reworked by him.
Here's something you might could use, I'm not sure, but, craft manufactured for intent for transportation. The reason I'm throwing that in there is because, I was thinking about aircrafts as well, because we have an airport. And so, you could possibly have aircraft that would need to be included.
All right, and just for a heads up, I have to do a little bit of a deeper dive on scrap metal. Like I said, there's a licensure for scrap metal dealers. It's something that is, dear to the General Assembly's heart, because there's a lot of theft, with certain parts of automobiles, and, and it's a crime dealing with in scrap metal without a permit and license. So I'm gonna have to dice that up a little bit to make sure we're good on that. I'm just giving you a heads up that will have a little bit of red line as to scrap metal.
That's interesting you brought that up, because I made a note. Stealing Cadillac converters in this county is rampant, as it is in every county.
In our parking lot.
Could we make, in a commercial ordinance, could we, I don't know what's the right word, legislate, dictate, what you can and cannot buy? So could we say you cannot legally sell a Cadillac converter to a scrap dealer in Oconee County?
I would not, we don't need to go there, because that really is covered by state law. That one I know is covered. So I know what that's a good thing to do, but
Okay.
When a pitfall we can have is too much, legislation, even if it's saying the same thing. But state law, I think, covers that fairly. I'm gonna go back and really, because scrap metal's covered in a few different places in the state code. And so under, a lot of it's in the criminal, title, which is, what it is. But then it's scattered about, so I want to make sure that's woven together for this. I think there's an opportunity that needs to be made more clear than I'll insert it in there and y'all can do it. I'm going to redline everything that I add or change, so you won't have to guess what's new or different.
Ms. Spicer brought up the batteries in these new all-electric cars.
I was just thinking about that.
I don't know, I mean, those things have been proven that they're dangerous if they sit out in junkyards or out in open or buried 10 feet under the ground. Do we need something in this to address that, if we don't want that in the county, or?
You don't want us to handle the disposal of batteries, period? Is that what you're saying? Or?
No, electric vehicle
No,
battery.
mainly the regular batteries for regular cars are not the same as these lithium, whatever they are in these electric vehicles. They are dangerous and have been proven that.
And that's what I was speaking to. I didn't mean just, the batteries, we have those have a normal combustion engine. But as to the lithium batteries for electrical vehicles, you're saying you want to carve that out and say,
Well,
hey,
I mean,
no disposal here?
there's
And I-
no safe way to store those things, so I don't know if that would be legal for us to say, no, you're not gonna have those batteries left here in Oconee County, put them somewhere else, or you only can put them one place.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a hard time with that, but I'll look at it to see, because that's not something I've looked at really in research, but I understand the concern, and I'll look at to see what's there, what's on the books, and what we can do to address that specific concern. With, blanket prohibition, I think, that's
That would
problematic,
probably be wrong.
but doing something to address a concern is.
It might be
my
worth
shot.
Ms. Spicer explaining some of the stuff about fires and things like that she found in her research to help say, do we need to carve out a section, or this is why?
The problem with a damaged battery in an electric vehicle is the spontaneous combustion. And there was a case in California where the damaged Tesla spontaneously combusted for 3 weeks. And they ended up putting it in a hole and burying it. They didn't know what to do with it. And on the Tesla website, it says if the damaged car Tesla comes in, it needs to have a clearance of 50 feet in case there's fire. And there's no mechanism to recycle the batteries of a damaged car because it's cheaper to build the battery with freshly mined lithium than it is to try to recycle an old one. So it comes with a myriad of problems, and on the Tesla website, it said, if there's an accident with this car, please warn the citizens downwind because of the vapor. So you've got biohazards, and environmental hazards for these damaged electric cars. So I don't, Frankie beat me to it, but I was thinking, can the county say not here, take it to Georgia, since Frankie has a Georgia shirt on?
I'll take a look at that, come up with some options, yeah, definitely Georgia. Come up with some options, so it's not just what I, invent on my own, and see what y'all like about that, see if we can do it like a menu.
That be under,
The-
can I?
Go ahead.
I had another note here, disposal plan, the hazmat plan. Should they be required to have that? Would that fall under, okay, if you get a EV battery or EV vehicle, do you have a plan to know what you do with it? What's your hazardous material? How do you follow that protocol?
I would think that there'd be something on the federal level that's gonna trickle down that we could adopt and incorporate, but I feel like I'm doing the law according to me at that point, so I need
A lot of
to
this
check.
will fall under
I need
DHEC
to
regulations
check.
if they've broached that point.
I
Yeah,
know Councilman Kane went to, when he was on the SCAC, asked for legislation regarding this particular problem.
that means we don't have anything on the state level.
I just wanted to get out that maybe we should have something in the document that talks about you must adhere to and/or follow manufacturer's guidelines and recommendations. Because that way, as things go forward, the liability issue, manufacturers are gonna be looking at that, and they're gonna be making these requirements such as 50 feet and all that. Even though you can't necessarily accomplish it every time, just if we have it in this document, then we're covered.
Right.
To be able to say, oh, see, you weren't following the guidelines.
And this kind of connected to the idea of putting in making junkyards compliant with whatever the fire codes are, because fire departments do have certain, they're figuring it out too. 4,500 gallons, I think, to try to just spray water on, that's the equivalent of 3 trucks, just on one damaged car. So everybody's still figuring it out.
Yeah, it definitely merits special consideration, so I'll see what I can conjure up, some options.
Do you agree, I'm just curious, with the idea of the manufacturer's recommendations?
I do, would include that in there. How, of course, manufacturers, they're making money. Their recommendations aren't always the most environmentally sensitive, or they're not looking out for Oconee County necessarily, but it is absolutely a good place where you can anchor on to that. So, we're not just pulling it out of the air, so. The next one is with your differentiation between the streets. Local streets, minor and major, and I can glean the essence of why you're doing that, and I understand the public purpose for it, but we also have essentially 2 definitions that you're using. You have the definition that you state here in the definition section, and then in 4D, access to commercial junkyards shall not be allowed from a minor local street, and it says the term minor and major are defined in the county development standards. Again, that term, but I'm assuming we're talking about the performance standards. And that definition there is based on average daily trips, as opposed to the definitions you all use above. So those are conflicting.
How do we resolve that?
Pick one, I suppose is one way to do it. But understand within the remainder of the code, and certainly within title, or chapter 26, the roads and bridges, section 32, they're thinking of kind of a different animal. They're thinking that, this is developed, and we do, if a new development's gonna come in, and we may have to improve a road, categorizing it based on trips because of the size of the development down there makes a whole lot of sense. It may not be apples to apples here. If you're wanting to stick with the way you've defined it in the definition section, it's probably best to strike. The terms minor and major are defined in the county development standards, that reference, so you just don't have the conflicting ones.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the way to go
Yeah,
about it.
that's, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so then let's skip down too fast. Definition setback, we all kind of know what a setback is, just making sure I'm on the same page though. Required distance between a structure or building line. Are you talking about the building footprint? Are you talking about the including the roof? Are you talking about what when you say building line?
I think it was the footprint.
Setback.
Was what we were.
We had talked about, as an example of the stacking of the cars, that we didn't want cars stacked on top of each other right next to the property line, was what our conversation was.
So that'd be more footprint.
So so when you say building line, in this context, when I read that, I was like, I'm not sure.
And
How
I'm
that
not sure,
applies, so it
I'm
might
not
create
sure
some
where
ambiguity.
the importance lies in this. Normally if you're putting up a fence or a screen, you're gonna put it up on the property line. would be normal. But then with county, anything else that's going vertical has to meet setback requirements. So are we gonna consider that the stuff is the vertical stuff, since there's really not a building other than a little office somewhere?
And that's my, that's my question.
And I don't know that we've firmed that thought process
We
up.
didn't really discuss it.
But I do remember us talking about stacking vehicles, and we really didn't want them stacked right next to the property line for fear that they may fall over. And if we were abutting a residential house, for example, down the road, that would be an unsafe condition.
That's something you can think about, and we'll maybe have some other wording options, and if you want to stick with it, we can talk about it next time, and y'all think about something, a different way to really fine tune that, because obviously that and the fencing is the meat of the ordinance, so you want to.
And we would like to know from a legal standpoint, I know in a residential community, you can have a driveway that goes right up to your property line, and therefore your car can be parked right up to the property line. And we're about to ask something different of this commercial entity and saying you can't park next to the property line, at least for the stuff we've defined as junk.
Can't have the junk next to the property line. So, yeah, setbacks, this long history of cases established those as legitimate, both for aesthetic purposes, but obviously for ingress, egress, and just general hazard purposes, and that certainly applies here. So I don't have a problem, again, going back to an equal protection type deal where you have, certain items in a residential area allowed to be within the setback area, and here not, because it's very different. It's just a matter of making sure we capture, like I said, what building line, what's that particularly mean? But differentiating between the two and not allowing the junk to be in the setback area, I mean, that's not problematic, as long as we get the definition clear.
Okay, setback, this is setback, and the definition of setback is on section 4B, 2 and 3.
You have the definition, essentially given up in the definition section of generally, here's what a setback is, and then yes, and then 4, B, is that what you said?
Yeah, 4B, each commercial junkyard
Those are the,
fence shall be set back.
those are the particular setbacks.
So 125 feet from the center of all county roads, 100 feet from the property line, so is that not the definition for setback?
Well, it still goes back, that is the application of, where the setback is. It's not necessarily the definition of, right, so it says, the thing has to be, here's the property line, has to be, this is my paper, is the thing, has to be set back 10 inches from the property line, or 20 inches if it's a waterway or whatever. But it doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of clarity on what the thing is that needs to be set back when you talk about the building.
Well, the fence is gonna be 125 feet from the, 100 feet from the property line, so any building, car, a piece of that business cannot be outside of that fence. Is that,
We would need to specify not outside the fence, and then we would need to define where the fence has to go.
Right, and then I had a question about that, and we'll get to that, may help narrow that down, because you talk about no doing business outside the fence, and that's hard to, narrow in on what.
Yeah, if somebody
business
pulls up and
is.
says, I want a carburetor, they're parking in the parking lot, which is probably outside the fence.
And they're doing business,
So the
right?
definition of setback says required distance between a structure or building. Structure being junk or fence,
That was the intent.
line, and the nearest property line or right of way. Okay.
So,
Can we delete building line? And does that make it easier if we're gonna have building line in there, since we can't really define
I
it?
think the notion, as I understand it, and tell me if I'm wrong, is essentially you all want to have, if it's, and this is all hypothetical in a sense, because you haven't voted to pass it along, but as it's developed, what was presented to me is that the fence, everything that is the junkyard is gonna be behind the fence and the shrubbery, and that fence is gonna be set back X from whatever the other thing is. So if that's the goal, I mean, yeah, getting rid of the building line and really even getting rid of the structure in a sense would be helpful for clarity purposes.
Isn't building line and fence line synonymous?
It could be, but it might not be. And that's what I'm trying to eliminate, is any kind of ambiguity for us, for Mr. Colby, in implementing it, and me in defending it, or what have you.
What else could it be?
I think if you anchor it to the fence, and that's really what you want to have off of, obviously, the area of concern, which is, be it a roadway, property line, or what have you. I think you can kind of, have the fence set back. And I may want to tinker with that now that we've had this discussion. But I mean,
Are
that's the
there
essence of
boundaries
it.
where a fence is not required?
I think it was all
All the way around.
it's all the way around as it's written now.
There's not, but there should be some differentiation from a parking lot where you're going to do the business and then the storage of the material.
So
So the building
that
line
was my
could be the
follow-up
edge of the
question, is
parking
what
lot.
doing
What's that?
business meant.
The building line could be the edge of the parking lot,
If we
the
define.
property-
rather than the fence.
Yeah,
Is that not the property line? Instead of the, I mean, are they one, that could be the synonymous in that case, couldn't it? I do
The
think
property
building line is
line, the
outward.
property line is, it's clear what the property line is. It's defined by the survey. But the building line is,
100
what's
feet.
not clear is, it's clear how far the building line has to be from the property line, right? In the ordinance. The question is, what is the building line? What is the definition of the building line? Is it the edge of the parking lot, the edge where the fence runs? It could be, it's like Mr. Reeves said, it could be several different things.
so if you could help
We
us
have
with
to help
that,
us.
that would be wonderful, knowing our intent.
Yeah, and I think my goal, the target I'll be shooting for is the fencing area. I mean, understand what the stuff is, the junk is, that you want to have in a safe, secure place. And that be set back. And then, of course, there's gonna be ancillary business when somebody pulls up to transact business that happens outside that setback area. And there aren't a whole lot of structures involved with a lot of these operations, so let me work with that language, but I understand where you're at, what the goal is. The next thing, temporary storage shall be defined as not exceeding 90 days, subject to state law. What was the thinking there?
What
were
line
y'all
are you
talk-
on? Oh, temporary
Yeah.
storage.
Temporary storage, yeah.
What state law were y'all
Pickens Law,
thinking about?
Pickens.
They have not become a state yet to themselves. They probably would try to.
I think that with Pickens, they were putting tow vehicles and things like that in their ordinance, and we had taken all of that side of things out. This may be just an
That we just
ancillary, something that stuck around that we didn't get out of.
I think that one
Carryover.
just sort of slipped in, we didn't catch
Yeah.
it, that probably should be taken out altogether.
Because the 90 days was really dealing with the tow truck stuff.
And they wish they could get 90 days.
Right below that, vegetation shall mean the following recommended. So you're not mandating these types, you're giving, hey, here's some guidance on the types of shrubbery, vegetation that can be used, but the goal ultimately is just the coverage, right?
Personally, my personal thought is if somebody's 100 feet off the road or 150 feet off the road and it's a dense forest of evergreen trees where you can't see in there anyway, I would hate for somebody to have to cut those trees down and plant some 3-foot red-tip petunias in there that are gonna now for the next 20 years show when they could have just left the current tree row. I hate to make it subjective on staff, and I don't even know that that's possible, but there's gotta be some human element to say, yeah, you are insulated from view, of the view lane or something.
The other ones, mainly, you can certainly just say, visibility is somewhat subjective, but it's still, most people can say that's visible or that's not. I would be more inclined to go down the visibility route and the fencing route if you're trying to keep it somewhat out of the public eye, I guess, is the goal. I don't know if you need the vegetation, which may be troublesome, or may not, I don't know.
Yes, I agree with you, because I've been, by junkyards that you're coming down a hill, junkyards, say on the right side, it doesn't matter if there's a 12-foot fence. You can see, because you're so much higher than where the junkyard is.
So I sure don't want us to have something in there that requires people to cut down the trees that are there providing a great screen in order to put up the stuff that we say is required.
Can we say that? Can we add that sentiment in
But the
there?
goal is ultimately is just so it's reasonably not visible. That's not the right way, that's not the way I'd write it, but it's, within reason, it's not visible from the main traveling way, right?
Yes.
A vegetative screen.
And if they used vegetation, or if they used a fence. But you want the fence to keep things in, so it's more than
Fence is for
vegetation.
safety. Right.
So the fence
The
plus,
vegetation is for a little bit more aesthetics, potentially to the situation. But again, the aesthetics may already be there just based on the fact that it's a dense forest that was already there.
Since it is objective, how are we going to make a requirement where someone is actually given permission to implement a particular plan? Would that go through James' office?
yeah, it's all gonna go through there, through James's office, and then the following, still James' office, but it works, there's bleed over with code enforcement between building code and planning. So that would be the follow-up. Did you meet what you said you were gonna do when you submitted your plans? But I understand where you're going here, but that does lead to maybe, hopefully it's the next one, if not, yeah, it is. So in the regulation of commercial junkyards shall be situated on suitable terrain so that the fence and vegetation hides the view of all junk from public roads and private property. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Whether or not you want to keep vegetation as you've defined it above, or just have it as, hey, this is a way to do it in addition to your fence, I'll tinker with language with that. But that first thing, when I read this is, we have neighbors with privacy fences and they look funny. I mean, 'cause you can still see they're right down there. I mean,
So is all junk, is that really enforceable?
I don't think it's practical. I think
Don't
with the
either.
Oconee County topography, I think that makes it very difficult. You can just do your best, I understand the goal, but to make somebody,
Reasonably hides the view of junk?
that's the word that, sometimes specificity is really good, sometimes some discretion and use of terms like reasonable is good.
Well, the benefit of having this ordinance in place goes back to if somebody's talking about putting in a new commercial junkyard, they're probably going to seek out a piece of property that helps them most easily fit within these parameters required, topography included. I mean, this isn't affecting existing stuff from my understanding, so unless they expand. So we're really talking about somebody
That's
saying,
not true.
I want to start a
have-
business.
That's not true. They have
Yeah.
1 year to come into compliance.
Oh, okay.
But they have less restrictive compliances. They're section 5.
Right.
Then I was incorrect in that assessment.
I'm gonna go along the reasonable route. I think it's good terminology and including what you have here. And, I may not do a whole lot with the vegetation to try to keep it as it's written. Y'all can put it back in, but I understand where you're going, and I think a reasonableness standard and an effort, 'cause there's gonna be a lot of people who wanna do this operation who, I don't know, it may happen, but I don't know how many folks, I'm gonna start a junkyard operation and then they go looking for the property necessarily. A lot of them may have the property and they wanna start an operation. And this may preclude them from doing it if you just gotta make it so you can't see it. You gotta have, flat landed junkyards. So I'll address that best I can. Ms. Williams, yeah?
I'm still thinking.
The 100 feet from all waterways, did you have a definition of waterways? I mean, maybe I'm the only one who thinks about this, but, you look at the federal government and its definition of a navigable stream, you'd be surprised at how that's changed over time, but,
Does DHEC have a definition?
Yeah, the waters of the state and how that flows, but it's, in my mind, it's a murky definition. I don't think that's what y'all are shooting for, because it's geared towards something different.
Ours again was about a pollution of water, not necessarily navigable water, but
Creek streams.
Yeah, they should have if there's a water issue, I would think there should be means of, they got to have a catch basin or a sediment pond, just like any development site. Any developed site, if there's any grading and soil move, they gotta have a runoff catch basin.
but sometimes those are temporary depending on the way they're set.
What about 100 feet from all bodies of water that, permanently have flow? Something below the water table, in other words, creeks, branches,
Yeah, there's plenty.
not ditches.
There's no lack of definitions out there. That's
think
that's
that was
kind of
the
the problem,
intent,
but I'll
wasn't
come back with some. I understand the goal is not necessarily for folks going by on their boats and saying, hey, there's a junkyard, but it's an environmental concern.
Grease running off of the motor or whatever it might be that are then getting into the water table.
I'll approach it from that angle.
Yeah, when you say water table, that to me is different than a stream or a creek or
Or
something.
water.
Because, you think about what's below the ground and people are drinking water and gasoline gets over here. It could be a mile down the road that affects the well.
Right.
So it's really not water table, it's really streams, active surface water.
Well, in agricultural terms, I just think called WOTUS, Waters of the U.S.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
it is in continuous litigation of what that means.
That was that when I
From
saw
an
that, that was the
agricultural
concern I
standpoint,
had.
because we have temporary bodies of water that the government want to control that are not there all the time, so it's a very broad subject, but,
It is, and that's
do
why
the best you can.
it's kind of different because that waters of the United States and navigable streams and all that has been broadened or shrunk over time because that's the federal government's way into regulating activities. Things, and I didn't learn about it until law school. I was like, this is really a navigable stream. I can't even get my foot wet in it. So I'll work on that one, see what we can come up with. Every commercial junkyard operator shall conduct all business within the fenced area. We already talked about that, so I'm gonna deal with the business, tinker with the business definition, so.
Mr. Chairman, can I be excused, please, sir?
Yes, you may, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you, guys.
See you, Pat.
For F, each commercial junkyard shall apply to DHEC for a MPDES stormwater discharge permit. So there's, land disturbance permits, when you hit a certain threshold, they're pollutant discharge permits based on the activity. Has this been looked into? Is there a particular target? Do you know that DHEC's going to have, and this is gonna fit for every junkyard, and that they would even have a stormwater permit for that?
I
don't
thought
think
I
that
read
they
that,
do.
and it was, in stormwater discharge for industrial stormwater discharge, and under that category came junkyards. I think That's what I recall.
Category did what?
Industrial stormwater discharge, and under that label came junkyards. I think
The
that's what
open dump is in there, I know. I don't know that junkyard is in there.
I don't have it with me, but maybe I can bring it to you, or
Yeah.
show it to you.
Yeah, certainly. So, under the industrial section, like I said, I know open dump is within there. I don't know that junkyards is in particular, but y'all didn't have anything in mind that you'd already
No.
fleshed out. All right. Fire prevention code, you're talking about the International Fire Code, South Carolina modifications. It's just not named that, right? Okay. And still in G, it ends with, the whole sentence, each commercial junkyard shall comply with all applicable chapters of the fire code and other pertinent requirements. So,
Is that okay?
No.
I was hoping it was.
We gave you a carte blanche blank there to,
Figure it out, people.
Obviously, that Pickens lawyer wasn't as
He wasn't as picky.
versed in
No, actually, I think I was the one that recommended that wording. Oh, God.
The idea is not bad. I mean, I will advise people to
requirement.
keep from getting boxed in whenever they can, but
Other requirements that, I don't know.
Is the purpose of G for fire protection, fire compliance only?
I
It is,
think,
and just strike out the, and the other pertinent
I
requirements.
think that there may have been a conversation about that the state requires junkyards that you've got to remove the gasoline and the oil and things like that.
That's what-
And this fell within that fire and then the oil and the gas, those were the other
to
requirements.
include the hazardous waste laws that are in play. So yeah, that's a big body of law, and I can address, all right.
Yeah.
All right, going down to existing, non-conforming commercial junkyards. You know, I'm talking about retail license, you know, that's the DOR, you know, has retail licenses for their business taxes and such, but there's no state-wide business license, there's no county business license. I just want to make sure y'all knew that those things aren't in existence. Okay.
I thought we'd removed some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I tried to.
The
say.
commercial.
Got
What
shot
line
down
is,
several
what line is this? Can we see? that?
5A,
5A?
okay.
Okay.
Just valid retail license.
There were several attempts to remove it.
Yeah, I tried to
Gotcha.
remove that altogether because the county doesn't have a retail license, the state doesn't have one. They have a tax permit thing that you have to get, but that's pretty much it.
The goal is to hit the commercial establishments. That was another means to do that. I think probably create some ambiguity until a business license is put in place, if it ever is, and that would be on the local level. So I would probably strike that. I'm gonna work with the commercial definition.
I think there was a consensus of intent that we deal with permitting because we need somebody to be able to put eyes on something saying, this is what you need to do, and then we're gonna visually inspect that that's what you did in establishing a commercial junkyard, but we weren't trying to create a policing, we weren't trying to create an entity that you had to report to on a regular basis like a license would require.
So you have it with the application procedure that's in there. So that'll cover it. If we hit a good definition of commercial, then I think you're solid.
Wasn't the intent to actually identify the yards that fell within the definition of this ordinance so that they could be regulated?
So that we could make sure that they were following the rules in establishing and maintaining that site.
Right, in this case, this is for the ones that are already established. 'Cause it's section 5.
Gotcha.
So it's really identifying people the yards that we want to identify based on a set of criteria, and then putting them into the record so that they can be regulated.
I think it's gonna come down to the commercial, getting that definition very solid and clear to the public. That'll get you where you need to go.
I don't know, I remember in the discussion that we were saying there's no way for us to know how many junkyards we have in the county right now. So we were trying to get something to be able to identify for communication purposes, maybe not regulation purposes, but to self-identify, you know? Let us know that you exist.
If somebody wants to make an effort to get county council to do a business license, then
Well, is
I'll
there any
draft
way to
that
put
ordinance,
something in here that's not
but I
requiring
brought
business
that up.
license?
you
But
know,
it requires them to.
surprised I'm still alive after I brought that up when I got here. It's not trying to do an extra charge for people, you know, a $1 business license. If you're a government entity just looking at regulating enterprises, a business license is a good way to go about it. I mean, that's just a pure fact of the matter. So you know what people are doing. They know that they're on the radar. That's not popular with everybody. Some people say, well, it's just another added expense. It doesn't have to be, $100, but it is a way to register, so to speak. I don't
Maybe it's-
advocate for that anymore because I brought it up at one time and I got knocked around and that was it.
But we can't require one business to do this and not require all the other businesses in the county to do the same thing.
Right, and I think that, I was putting that out there as business licenses in general, and I know that's not what you're talking about here. I think the application and approval of that application, and then good definition of commercial, so when code enforcement's out there, I promise you, and I'm sure James will say the same thing, there's no lack of people who are ready to complain about things that they think are violating property maintenance code or the code. Otherwise, there'll be a complaint. Someone walked in my office yesterday about a complaint about something that may happen. We were talking about 30 minutes, and I couldn't force myself for that conversation. It hadn't even happened yet. But what I'm saying is, it's not only code enforcement, which is complaint driven, that would police it, but there's, and
Neighbors.
certainly this, and neighbors are
I
ready to
think
bring.
at that point, Mr. Vassy brought up the point that RV parks need permits.
I'm sorry?
RV parks need permits.
We do have.
So it's not like they're being singled out as nobody else getting a permit, because RV parks get one.
Well, RV park, subdivisions, we have applications and approvals of those applications for
But this says license.
everything. That's why I'm
So-
probably gonna come at it differently
Okay.
with the rewrite.
Thank you for going through all this.
Well,
We feel like we're getting in the home stretch.
Can we, what's the seventh inning stretch?
If we don't hurry up, we might take one.
all right, so then we've got, with the existing non-conforming, A3, fence or vegetation required herein shall be located not less than 20 feet from the right-of-way of a public road, and not less than 50 feet from a waterway. So with these and our earlier conversations about setbacks and such, at least give me an idea of what you were thinking with.
If it's in conflict, we weren't thinking. Specifically about specific sentence items. Some of this was put in bulk. And we tried to catch overlaps and conflicts, but we've obviously missed some.
So what we're saying is we could strike that? That's a question.
Well, you're gonna wanna it's a matter of what you wanna do with the existing facilities. As Mr. Nix pointed out, they are still regulated, but it's a little bit less draconian, a little bit less severe than with the new one. But this one seems like you're encouraging them to put their business or their fence as close to what you're trying to get set back away from
Yeah, not less
than
than,
the other.
most time you'd say at least 50 feet.
Right, as opposed to within. Well,
I think it is a mistake.
That's something y'all can, you can just ponder over that one. And
you could put a big blank in that spot when you send it back to us and say, finish this.
Could we at least 50 feet? I mean, I don't know.
I think that's where, that was the intent, but I didn't want to guess, because you may have something else in mind.
Are we okay with just changing it to at least?
That's the way it'll come back. If
Okay.
y'all think, no, we were actually wanting to do it that way because of whatever, then we'll
Okay.
fix it. Then same section B, no existing junkyard may expand without a proper approved application. That's a difficult one, because they're expanding, they brought in a new car, whatever, is there an idea that you had a threshold for what expansion would trigger this? And we've got,
We were talking about expansion of utilized acreage or utilized square foot.
Footprint.
In other words, if they got a 100-acre piece and they've got it filled up in order to, or they've been using that 100 acres and then they want to expand to 150 acres, they got to get a new application. Have to have another application on file to start expanding that 100 into the 150 acres.
Be if they extend the building line,
Yeah.
period, not 5% or 20%. Our other grandfathering language has, it's kind of like 50%, and there's a little bit more of there's a margin, so you don't have minor expansion triggering the whole cascade of regulations on grandfathered uses.
I think that would be a good recommendation from you.
What I'll do is I'm just gonna give a blank and a percent, and then y'all can have that next time.
And give us, if you can, give us some examples of what the others regulations do, like the 50, the whatever, 25, or what would be.
What you feel like would be normal.
Okay.
Normal. What is normal?
Normal.
Customary. Is that a better word?
That's a good one. Okay, so then C says notwithstanding the provisions for administration contained in section 4 of this article is not intended to impose additional restrictions on non-conforming portion of junkyard, but it does. So is that just superfluous, wasn't meant to keep
the
on
way I
there?
read this was B says, if you expand, whatever that's gonna be, the new rules only apply to the expansion, not to the rest of the junkyard. And that's part of what C is saying too, right? C is saying,
These regulations do apply to the non-conforming portions in the sense that it's written, which are less strenuous. And then the, and only to that. The additional restrictions only apply
C is
to
the
the
back, C is the
expansion.
no backfit rule. You can't go backfit section 4
I got you.
on existing junkyards.
So down to section 6, and I think it's my last one, yeah. I think y'all appreciate you bearing with me. It's A1, commercial junkyard application, all appropriate permits. Again, is that something we can delineate? Make more specific? I'm not saying, I'm not like opposed to this, but I didn't know if you were like.
When we were
"Oh,
thinking
you know,
about-
they got to have this and got to have that. I think recently you changed, 32, so you had to go to DOT first on 123. And you had that specificity.
I think our general thought, and I may be speaking out of turn, was if they have a building that they are gonna have to get a permit for construction of building, then they would go to the appropriate permit for that. If they're gonna put a bathroom in it, then they're gonna have to go get a septic permit and the appropriate permitting process for that.
Mr. Johnson, I know you had that one or two lingering questions. You put a hold on those till I went through. Did you
Actually,
catch those?
my biggest concern or confusion is we use the words in capital, commercial junkyard, and everything I've ever read from a legal standpoint, that if it's a capitalized statement or capitalized word, then that's a definable word typically, and we didn't have a definition for commercial junkyard in our definitions. That was my only
Yeah,
point.
we addressed that. I'm gonna take the shot at
Yeah,
the
and you
commercial
said you were
aspects.
gonna work on that part.
Oh. I did have one that I skipped. remember, and I don't remember where it was, there was an implied setback, or implied essentially easement area for a public road. I think it's 50. What is this? Or is in definition of right of way, I just skipped over it. Shall denote the limits of public road property on county roads where there is no deeded right of way along a road or highway. The right of way shall be considered to be 25 feet from the center line. So, I mean, as y'all know, I'm sure familiar with, that can be problematic because we have a lot of, most roads are prescriptive easements, no deeded right of way, and many of those are 12-foot ditch to ditch or 14-foot ditch to ditch. So when you expand those to 50 foot and then go back further from that, that's difficult. I think, I mean, it works generally for buildings is to just go off the roadway. I mean, which would include,
Just so many feet off the edge of the pavement.
yeah. and
Some of
dirt
them are
roads.
just to the edge of the pavement.
So I'll leave that, but I'm gonna have a red line alternate.
Well, we could say something like 15 feet from the edge of the road.
Well, you're still looking at probably about the same amount of intrusion. I say intrusion, but, you know, if folks are, there's a deeded easement or there's a right-of-way that's recorded and it runs, and plenty of places that have been developed, it runs through their yard and you don't know it until the highway department comes and wants to expand, well, that's on them. You know, they bought it with that as a matter of public record, that the road was, you had 100 foot, and the Department of Transportation will have that. But here it's different, because people have moved in, there's no easement, there's nothing even about the road on the record, and it may only be 12 feet, and they're relying on that. So when we say, no, we're gonna make it, for purposes of this, a 50-foot wide, that just caused me some concern.
You don't run into that problem in section 4 because it defines county roads as from the center. And only right of ways for US or South Carolina highways. Where you run into the problem is in section 5 where you talk about 20 feet from the right of way of a public road. It doesn't specify whether it's a county road or a state road. So section 5 is where you're gonna run into that problem with that. If you run into a problem.
The road going down.
For the existing
No right of way.
regulation.
Pavement to pavement, edge to pavement, edge to pavement.
I'll leave it as is. I mean, it's all gonna be visible, but I'll come up with, for those prescriptive easement roads, it's gonna be more going off of the ditch to ditch, as opposed to superimposing on them easement that doesn't exist. So that was it that I had. I took a little bit over 6 o'clock, sorry. Did y'all have anything else?
Nope, thank you so much for
Yeah, thank you.
spending the time to go through it with us to the degree that you have.
Glad to.
Is there any other discussion on this subject? I need a motion to
So
adjourn.
you actually have a motion and a second on the floor that started the discussion?
Oh, we did, that's right.
Thank you, James, very much. So it's to finalize me bringing this back to you all, so you just call for that.
Thank you for doing that. We can leave out of here and all this stuff goes in the
Good work, it's
trash.
a good catch. I wouldn't have to, I've never.
Motion is for you
Call for a
to
vote.
finalize this, and bring it back to us for a review.
Right, that was the motion, and so now it's just a call for the vote. We've had that very lengthy and good
All those in
discussion.
favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Now,
Now motion to adjourn.
There you go.
adjourn.
Second.
Aye.
Oh, what's that?
We don't need a second.